Hmm. Hmm. Yes, I see. But if I'm going to talk about science, I had better put on something protective, shouldn't I? There. That's better. Now, first, let's be very clear on what we're talking about here. Science, true science, is set up to challenge its claims and look for evidence that might prove it false. You may remember hearing at some point in your schooling the term the ability to falsify the test or the claim. That's science. So, what is pseudoscience? Well, pseudoscience is set up to look for evidence that supports its claims. In other words, it starts out from the premise that the claim is true, absolutely true, and all we need to do is find the evidence that actually supports it, not falsifies it. And that's the problem. Pseudoscience is very seductive because oftentimes you're going to hear it phrased as such something like, oh, everybody knows that. And it can creep into an awful lot of different ways in an awful lot of different factors of our lives. Let me give you some examples. Let's talk about astrology. Now, astrology is, in fact, a legitimate precursor to our modern day science of astronomy. Now, that was an outgrowth of the fact that both things relied on observation of the movements of stars and planets in the heavens and trying to figure out why they did those things. The problem was astrology would have you believe that the gravitational or magnetic field effects of those various movements had something to do with all the events that happen both on this planet, the surrounding planet, and in our individual lives. It's balderdash, of course. There's an old story, probably apocryphal, of an old Roman man who was a student of science. So what happened was, on his estate, in a noble house, he found a child that was born at exactly the same time and the same day as a child that was born to a slave family on the same estate. And he tracked what happened to them as it related to astrology and discovered that, well, their fates and their stations in life throughout their lives were totally different, as could be expected if the stars and planets had no effect whatsoever on their lives. In fact, current astronomers that are around today try and use things that have been discovered since then to explain away why it works now as opposed to not necessarily then. One of the more frequent things they talk about is gravitational fields, but there really is only one gravitational field that is close enough and powerful enough to affect us on this planet. That's right. It's that big glowing gas ball in the sky that we call the sun. It's physically the closest star to us. And it doesn't affect us one way or the other in how we love our lives or our fates. Astrology, when examined, is balderdash. Cryptozoology, the study of animals that are rumored to exist. Let me stress that, rumored to exist. Now, they call these kinds of creatures cryptids, and there is a certain body of evidence that things like the gorilla, the giant squid, the okapi, and others, well, they're no longer hearsay but real creatures recognized by real science because They finally found living or extinct examples of them. But let's take a look at some of the other very popular ones, like Bigfoot, a creature man-like that supposedly lives in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S., the remote fastnesses of the Himalayan mountains. Oh, yes, this ape-like creature, so big that lives so remotely, doesn't leave behind any remains when it dies. There's no skeletons, no desiccated bodies. Apparently, it just goes off and disintegrates completely and is never seen nor heard from again. Now, what is the likelihood of that, considering that remains of other animals are found every day, even in very remote areas, and we can identify them? The fact that no living or dead specimen of Bigfoot has ever been definitively seen kind of tells the story there, doesn't it? The same thing holds true for the internationally known Loch Ness Monster, an incredibly profitable tourist attraction that brings people into that area of Scotland year in and year out for a whole bunch of people that are hoping that maybe, just maybe, it's real and they will be the one that will actually see it and maybe actually capture it on film. No one actually has. Everything that has ever been produced has been explained at this point. Again, this is something that seems to go out there, live a solitary and alone life, and then when it dies, it just disintegrates into nothing. This is why cryptozoology goes right down the path of pseudoscience. Now, I can understand why people do the things that they do involving cryptozoology because, well, it's fun. It's kind of nice to be able to go out there and try and find something that maybe has a remote possibility of existing. But I wouldn't bet the farm on it. So now that you've had a taste for where pseudoscience theoretically came from, and I can cover other topics in that genre if you let me know about it in the comments below, let's bring it up into more modern times. Let's see how something like, say, crowdfunding uses pseudoscience and how historically it's linked. Tech was supposedly based on Indiegogo off of some sort of ancient Oriental or Asian principles, many of which would be now known as acupuncture or possibly acupressure, but they tried to bring a more modern twist to it by claiming that they were measuring at these various acupuncture meridian points the electrical conductivity of the individual organs in your body. Yeah, it didn't make any sense, but it's the kind of pseudoscience and the way it's presented that people might buy into. And they had taken a lot of trouble to dress up their nonsense in pseudoscientific terms and trying to give certain details that would give it credence, like claiming that it had been tested, that it had gone through clinical studies, things of that nature. Of course, no one could find those studies. No one could read the details of them. No one knew who they had given those studies to, but it was supposed to be all on the up and up, and they even had within the campaign all these testimonials of people who said that this thing did what it's supposed to do. But there was one catch. The device wasn't FDA approved, and they actually had to go to great pains to tell everyone that. Why? Well, I suppose they didn't want to go to jail. But then again, they also were not successful on Indiegogo either. The campaign died on Indiegogo, but reappeared on, of all places, its own website that I guess it could not be thrown away from. And well, the rest, as they say, is history. I have no idea how many people lost to this pseudoscientific device, which looks remarkably like an adult toy, but I'm sure that somebody somewhere probably did actually try this thinking it was going to work. And if they think it's going to work on them, well, maybe the placebo effect helped them out, maybe it doesn't. But at any rate, in my opinion, this was pseudoscience to the max.